Wisdom, that's the test. Which rival wisdom team is best? 52 teams of 8 antique rival wisdoms that have passed the test of time to encourage, educate, and entertain generations for centuries. Team 10, Transcending Oppression. Quote definitions, biographical context, and synergy analysis to replace hate with motivational education to guidealife.com. Quote 10.1. The color of the skin is in no way connected with strength of the mind or intellectual powers. Benjamin Banneker, 1731 to 1806. Quote definition, intellectual capacity, mental strength, and the power of human reason are completely independent of race. There's no biological, moral, or logical connection between skin color and the quality of a person's mind. Quote application. This quote is a direct, evidence-backed refutation of the foundational lie that has justified more hatred, oppression, and human cruelty than perhaps any other falsehood in American history. For replacehate.org. It is the intellectual foundation. Replace the lie with the truth, and the hatred built on that lie loses its justification. Benjamin Banneker was born free in 1731 in Baltimore County, Maryland, the grandson of an English indentured servant named Molly Welsh, who had purchased, freed, and married an African man named Banneker. He received a modest early education at a Quaker school, but was largely self-taught, borrowing a pocket watch as a young man and constructing from it, entirely from memory and observation, a fully functioning wooden clock that kept accurate time for decades and was considered a marvel by everyone who saw it. He had no formal training in mechanics, mathematics, or engineering. He had curiosity, intelligence, and the willingness to teach himself whatever he needed to know. In his 50s, Banneker taught himself astronomy and advanced mathematics, well enough to calculate ephemerides, the complex astronomical tables used by farmers, sailors, and navigators. He published these calculations in a series of almanacs from 1792 to 1797 that were widely distributed throughout the eastern United States. In 1791, he was appointed to the surveying team that laid out the boundaries of Washington, D.C. He sent a copy of his almanac to Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson, accompanied by a letter challenging Jefferson's stated belief in black intellectual inferiority with pointed and eloquent directness. Jefferson wrote back acknowledging the almanac's quality and forwarding it to the Academy of Sciences in Paris as evidence of black intellectual capability, a response that was, by the standards of the era, remarkable. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Confront and reject racial stereotypes about intellectual capacity as empirically false, not merely morally objectionable. 2. Recognize that beliefs about racial intelligence are not neutral observations, but weapons forged to justify exploitation. 3. Seek and share the evidence, abundant, historical, and contemporary, that demolishes intellectual hierarchies built on race. 4. Apply Banneker's standard universally. Judge human minds by what they produce, not by the body that houses them. Banneker's life was itself the refutation he articulated. A self-taught free black man in 18th century America who built a working clock, calculated astronomical tables, helped design the nation's capital, and corresponded with its Secretary of State on terms of intellectual equality. His existence was the argument. He made it explicit, so no one could miss it.
Quote 10.2. Cruelty is contagious in uncivilized communities. Harriet Jacobs, 1813 to 1897. Quote definition. Cruelty spreads through communities the way disease spreads through populations. It infects those who witness it, normalizes what was once unthinkable, and lowers the moral threshold of everyone exposed to it over time. Uncivilized communities are both the cause and the consequence of cruelty's spread. Quote application. This observation is the social science behind replacehate.org's entire mission. Hate is not merely a personal failing, it is contagious. Communities saturated in cruelty produce more cruelty. The antidote is civilization, education, wisdom, kindness modeled and practiced, which raises the moral threshold and makes cruelty less thinkable rather than more. Harriet Jacobs was born into slavery in Edenton, North Carolina, in 1813. She spent nearly 7 years hiding in a tiny crawl space above her grandmother's house, 3 feet high, 9 feet long, 7 feet wide, before escaping north in 1842. She eventually purchased her own freedom and that of her children, and in 1861 published Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, the first autobiography written by a formerly enslaved black woman, under the pseudonym Linda Brent. Jacobs's observation about the contagion of cruelty was drawn from years of direct witness. She had watched slavery's violence spread through the white community of Edenton, not just among enslavers but among overseers, neighbors, and bystanders who were progressively desensitized to suffering they witnessed daily. She observed how cruelty rewired communities' moral instincts, how children raised in slaveholding households absorbed the logic of domination as normal, how even those who privately disapproved felt unable to act against a system whose cruelty had become ambient. Her insight was not rhetorical. It was the careful observation of a social scientist who had lived inside the laboratory of slavery's effects. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Understand cruelty as a social phenomenon with contagion dynamics, not merely an individual moral failing. 2. Take seriously the moral environment of communities. What is normalized there shapes what individuals within it consider permissible. 3. Recognize the civilizing function of education, wisdom, and kindness as the active countercontagion to cruelty's spread. 4. Act on the understanding that tolerating cruelty, even as a bystander, participates in its transmission. Harriet Jacobs's Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl was initially dismissed by some readers as too extreme to be credible. It has since been fully authenticated and is now recognized as one of the most important documents of American slavery. She spent the Civil War and its aftermath doing relief work among freed people in Alexandria, Virginia, and Savannah, Georgia, fighting the contagion of cruelty with the counter-contagion of organized care, education, and community building. She modeled the cure she had diagnosed.
Quote 10.3. Character, not circumstances, makes the man. Booker T. Washington, 1856 to 1915. Quote definition. The fundamental determinant of a person's worth, capacity, and ultimate impact is the character they develop and maintain, not the circumstances of birth, poverty, oppression, or disadvantage they were born into or forced to endure. Quote application. This principle is simultaneously a challenge and a liberation. It challenges excuses, including legitimate ones, while liberating people from the permanent definition of their worst circumstances. For replacehate.org, it is the message that dignity and achievement are available to everyone regardless of where they started, because character is always within reach. Booker Taliaferro Washington was born into slavery in Franklin County, Virginia in 1856. His first years of freedom after emancipation were spent in poverty in West Virginia, where he and his family worked in salt furnaces and coal mines. He walked much of the 500 miles to Hampton Institute in Virginia to get an education, arriving dirty and penniless and demonstrating his fitness for admission by cleaning a room so thoroughly that the head teacher, a New England woman of exacting standards, inspected it with a white handkerchief and found nothing to fault. He graduated, became a teacher, and in 1881 was asked to lead a new school for black students in Tuskegee, Alabama. He arrived to find no building, no equipment, and almost no money. Over the next 30 years, Washington built Tuskegee Institute into one of the most important educational institutions in America, pioneering practical vocational education, attracting philanthropic support from Andrew Carnegie and others, and becoming the most influential black leader in the country, invited to dine at the White House by Theodore Roosevelt, consulted by presidents and industrialists, and commanding a national network of black institutions and newspapers. He was also deeply controversial, criticized by W.E.B. Du Bois and others for what they saw as an accommodation to segregation's permanence. That debate is legitimate and important, but what is indisputable is that Washington built everything he built from circumstances that would have defeated most people, through the sheer force of the character he developed. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Distinguish between circumstances, which are often unchosen and unfair, and character, which is always within the individual's power to develop. 2. Refuse to allow unjust circumstances to become a permanent identity or a permanent limitation. 3. Invest in character development, honesty, discipline, persistence, integrity, as the most powerful response to adverse conditions. 4. Apply this principle with compassion. It liberates rather than blames, because it affirms that character is available to everyone. Washington delivered this observation not as a comfortable platitude but as a hard-won conviction. He had seen character overcome circumstances that were genuinely brutal and systematically unjust. He had also seen circumstances destroy people who had not built the character to endure and transcend them. He knew the difference from the inside, and he taught it to every student who passed through Tuskegee.
Quote 10.4. You have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars to change the world. Harriet Tubman, 1822 to 1913. Quote definition. The resources required for extraordinary achievement, strength, patience, and passion sufficient to change the world, are not external gifts available only to the privileged or the fortunate. They already exist within every person, waiting to be claimed and deployed. Quote application. This is the most direct and powerful affirmation in Team 10, a declaration from a woman who had every reason to believe the opposite, addressed to people in conditions of oppression, telling them the truth about their own capacity. For replacehate.org, it is the message that no one is too small, too disadvantaged, or too damaged to contribute to the change the world needs. Araminta Ross, who renamed herself Harriet Tubman, was born into slavery on a Maryland plantation around 1822. In 1849, fearing she would be sold further south, she escaped alone through nearly 90 miles of hostile territory to Philadelphia. Then she went back. 13 times she returned to Maryland to lead others to freedom, personally guiding approximately 70 enslaved people north via the Underground Railroad. She is reported to have said, she never lost a single passenger. She carried a pistol and used it not for protection against slave catchers, but to ensure that anyone who lost their nerve and wanted to turn back understood the stakes. Turning back endangered everyone. During the Civil War, she served the Union Army as a spy, scout, and strategist, leading the Combahee River Raid in 1863 that liberated more than 700 enslaved people in a single night, the largest single liberation operation in the Underground Railroad era, conducted deep in Confederate territory. After the war, she continued working for women's suffrage, for the establishment of a home for elderly Black people in Auburn, New York, and for the recognition of the contributions Black soldiers and spies had made to the Union cause. She lived to approximately 91 years of age, spending almost none of that time at rest. Her declaration that the necessary resources lie within every person was not inspirational rhetoric. It was the operating belief that had powered her entire life. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Reject the belief that extraordinary capacity belongs only to extraordinary circumstances of birth or privilege. 2. Recognize strength, patience, and passion as inner resources that can be cultivated and deployed, not fixed quantities assigned at birth. 3. Aim at star-level goals, changing the world, rather than settling for the comfort of modest ambitions that do not require full engagement. 4. Trust the declaration of someone who proved it under the most extreme possible conditions. The capacity is already there. Harriet Tubman was asked late in her life whether she had ever been afraid. She said she never ran her railroad by moonlight. She ran it on the dark of the moon. She worked in maximum darkness, in maximum danger, with maximum confidence in the internal resources of the people she led. She knew what was within them because she knew what was within herself.
Quote 10.5. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Frederick Douglass, 1818 to 1895. Quote definition. Progress, genuine, meaningful, lasting advancement in human conditions and human freedom, does not arrive without struggle. The struggle is not an unfortunate obstacle to progress. It is its necessary mechanism. Demanding progress without accepting the struggle required to achieve it is a contradiction. Quote application. Anyone working to replace hate with wisdom and kindness will encounter real struggle, resistance, setbacks, slow progress, and the opposition of those who benefit from things as they are. Douglass's principle reframes that struggle not as evidence of failure, but as proof that genuine progress is being pursued. Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey was born into slavery in Talbot County, Maryland, around 1818. He never knew his exact birth date, a deprivation he later named as one of slavery's deliberate cruelties. His mother, Harriet Bailey, was enslaved. His father was almost certainly a white man, possibly his enslaver. He taught himself to read using a spelling book and the help of his enslaver's wife until her husband forbade it, at which point Douglas continued his education secretly, trading bread to poor white boys in exchange for reading lessons. At 16, he was sent to a slave breaker named Covey, who beat him repeatedly. One day Douglas fought back. Covey never touched him again. That act of resistance was, Douglas later wrote, the turning point that made him a man rather than a slave in his own mind. He escaped north in 1838, became a speaker for the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society, and published his autobiography in 1845, a document so precise, detailed, and eloquent that many refused to believe an enslaved man had written it. He spent the next 50 years as the most important black public intellectual and activist in American history, newspaper editor, advisor to presidents, U.S. Marshal for the District of Columbia, minister to Haiti, and the author of 3 autobiographies that remain among the most important documents in American literature. The full version of the quote, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will," is among the most cited statements in the history of American social justice. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Accept struggle as an integral and necessary component of meaningful progress, not an unfortunate byproduct to be minimized. 2. Reinterpret the presence of difficulty and resistance as confirmation that something worth fighting for is being pursued. 3. Maintain commitment to long-term goals through the inevitable struggle rather than retreating when opposition appears. 4. Understand that the magnitude of the struggle often correlates with the magnitude of the progress it makes possible. Frederick Douglass struggled for 70 years and produced progress that reshaped the United States. He was on the platform at the dedication of the Freedmen's Memorial in 1876, delivering the most complicated speech of his career, praising Lincoln while honestly cataloging Lincoln's limitations. He was still struggling, still making progress, still refusing to simplify what was genuinely complex. The struggle never ended. Neither did the progress.
Quote 10.6. Don't sit down and wait for the opportunities to come. Get up and make them. Sarah Breedlove, Madam C.J. Walker, 1867 to 1919. Quote definition. Opportunity is not a gift delivered to the passive. It is a creation of the active. Waiting for favorable conditions, permission, or the right moment is a strategy that reliably produces nothing. The alternative is to rise and build the opportunities that waiting would never bring. Quote application. For anyone working to spread wisdom and replace hate, this principle is the antidote to the most common form of inaction. Waiting until conditions are better, until more support arrives, until the moment seems right. Breedlove made her fortune, and her impact, by making opportunities that the world had no intention of providing to a black woman born into poverty in post-Reconstruction Louisiana. Sarah Breedlove appears in Team 9 as well. Her life was rich enough in both achievement and principle to justify more than one appearance in these 52 teams. Born in 1867 to formerly enslaved parents on a Delta, Louisiana cotton plantation, orphaned by 7, married at 14, widowed at 20 with an infant daughter, working as a washerwoman for nearly 20 years, earning barely more than $1 a day. Breedlove had accumulated by her late 30s exactly 0 of the conditions that conventional wisdom associates with business success. She had no capital, no connections, no formal education beyond the most rudimentary level, and no examples of women like her succeeding in business, because there weren't any. She developed a hair care formula, began selling it door to door, trained other women as sales agents, built a manufacturing operation, established a training school, and died in 1919 as the first self-made female millionaire in American history, having created economic opportunity for over 20,000 women who, like her, had been sitting in circumstances that offered nothing. She didn't wait for the beauty industry to welcome black women. She built a parallel industry. She didn't wait for white investors to fund her. She funded herself from sales revenue. She didn't wait for society to make a place for her. She made a place, and then made room for 20,000 others. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Reject the passive waiting posture that treats opportunity as something external that arrives rather than something internal that is built. 2. Recognize that systems designed to exclude will never voluntarily create opportunities for those they exclude. Those opportunities must be made. 3. Act on the available resources, however modest, rather than waiting for ideal conditions that may never arrive. 4. Understand that the act of making one opportunity almost always creates the conditions for the next one. Breedlove's instruction, get up and make them, contains two verbs that deserve equal attention. Getting up is the physical act of refusing passivity. Making is the creative act of building something from available material. Together they describe the entire arc of her life. She got up from cotton fields, from a washtub, from the floor of poverty, and she made a product, a company, a fortune, a movement, a principle that outlasted her by more than a century.
Quote 10.7. All generalizations are dangerous, even this one. Alexander Dumas, 1802-1870. Quote definition. The act of generalizing, drawing broad conclusions about categories of people or things from limited examples, is inherently dangerous because it erases the individual, distorts reality, and provides the intellectual scaffolding for prejudice and injustice. The self-referential irony of the quote, which is itself a generalization, sharpens the point. Even the attempt to warn against generalizations is subject to its own critique. Quote application, stereotyping, the generalization of characteristics across racial, ethnic, national, religious, or gender groups, is the intellectual mechanism by which hatred organizes itself. Dumas's warning, delivered with elegant wit, is the cognitive antibody to stereotyping. Teach people to notice and question generalizations, including their own, and you dismantle one of hatred's primary tools. Alexander Dumas Père was born in 1802 in Villers-Cotterêts, France, the son of Thomas Alexander Dumas, a French general of Haitian and African descent who was one of the most remarkable soldiers in Napoleonic France, and a French innkeeper's daughter. Alexander's father died when he was 4, leaving the family in poverty. He had almost no formal education, moved to Paris at 20, and within a decade had become the most popular and prolific writer in France, producing The Three Musketeers, The Count of Monte Cristo, and dozens of other novels and plays that were devoured by readers across Europe and translated into virtually every major language. He is estimated to have written, with collaborators, over 100,000 pages of published work. Dumas lived his entire life under the shadow and the occasional burden of his mixed racial heritage. He was celebrated as a genius and mocked as an African, invited into the finest salons in Paris and subjected to racial slurs from people who had just finished reading his novels. He responded to these contradictions with wit, productivity, and the kind of self-aware intelligence that produced this famous aphorism. He knew from personal experience what generalizations did to real people. He was the living refutation of every generalization his critics applied to him, and he had the intellectual elegance to make his warning against generalizations its own self-undermining joke, ensuring it would be remembered. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Develop the habit of noticing generalizations, especially comfortable ones, and subjecting them to scrutiny. 2. Recognize that generalizations about groups erase the individuals within those groups in ways that are both intellectually dishonest and humanly harmful. 3. Apply the critique of generalization reflexively to one's own assumptions about every group, including one's own. 4. Use Dumas's self-referential wit as a model for engaging with intellectual complexity rather than seeking false certainty. Alexander Dumas was himself the most eloquent argument against every generalization applied to him. The grandson of an enslaved Haitian woman became the most widely read French novelist of the 19th century. The man who received racial insults wrote the most beloved adventure stories in European literature. He didn't defeat generalizations by arguing against them, he defeated them by making them visibly absurd. That is, in the end, the most effective way to handle dangerous generalizations, produce the counter-evidence so abundantly that the generalization collapses under its own weight.
Quote 10.8. Religion without humanity is very poor human stuff. Sojourner Truth, 1797 to 1883. Quote definition. Religious practice, doctrine, and institution that is not grounded in genuine concern for human beings, their dignity, their suffering, their liberation, is not merely inadequate, but actively poor, thin, hollow, and unworthy of the name. Humanity is the test of religion's authenticity. Quote application. This quote cuts directly to the heart of one of the most persistent failures in American religious history, the use of religious authority and scripture to justify slavery, segregation, and the degradation of human beings. Sojourner Truth, who was deeply religious, insists that any religion that fails the test of humanity has failed at its most fundamental level. For replacehate.org, this is the standard: wisdom and kindness are the proof of genuine faith, not doctrine or ritual. Isabella Baumfree was born into slavery around 1797 in Ulster County, New York, a Dutch-speaking community where she learned English only as a second language. She was sold multiple times, experienced brutal violence, had a child taken from her illegally after New York's emancipation law took effect, and sued in court, successfully, for that child's return, becoming one of the first Black women to win a legal case against a white man in the United States. In 1843, she said she heard the voice of God instructing her to travel and preach, renamed herself Sojourner Truth, and spent the next 40 years doing exactly that, traveling, speaking, and advocating for abolition, women's rights, and the rights of freed people after the Civil War. Her most famous speech, delivered extemporaneously at the 1851 Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio, and known as Ain't I a Woman, was a direct challenge to the religious and biological arguments being used to exclude both Black people and women from full civic participation. She knew the Bible intimately, quoted it fluently, and used it as a weapon against those who weaponized it against her. Her observation that religion without humanity is poor human stuff was not a critique from outside religion. It was a critique from deep within it, from someone who had spent her life watching enslavers, politicians, and clergy use religious language to justify the most inhuman treatment of human beings she had personally witnessed and survived. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Apply humanity as the primary test of any religious, moral, or philosophical claim. Does it increase or diminish human dignity? 2. Reject religious or ideological frameworks that exclude, degrade, or dehumanize people as failing their own stated standards. 3. Recognize that genuine faith of any tradition expresses itself in how human beings are treated, not primarily in doctrine or ritual. 4. Use Sojourner Truth's standard as a universal measure. Any belief system that produces cruelty toward people has answered the question of its own worth. Sojourner Truth continued speaking and advocating until she was physically unable to do so, dying at approximately 86 in 1883. She had met Abraham Lincoln, lobbied Congress, recruited Black soldiers for the Union Army, and desegregated Washington, D.C. streetcars by refusing to leave one and suing the driver who assaulted her, winning. She was, in the fullest possible sense, religion with humanity. Faith expressed entirely as service to the human beings around her and insistence on their worth.
How they work together as a unified philosophy to replace hate and guide a life with motivational education for all. The Transcending Oppression Framework. Truth Layer. Dismantling the lies that power oppression, quotes 1-7. Banneker. Demolish the foundational intellectual lie that skin color determines intellectual capacity, with evidence that cannot be argued away, only ignored. Dumas. Dismantle the cognitive mechanism that generates all such lies, generalization itself, by making the habit of stereotyping visible, questionable, and ultimately self-defeating. Together, attack oppression at its intellectual root. Banneker refutes the specific lie that has done the most damage in American history. Dumas disarms the general cognitive weapon that produces such lies. Together they leave prejudice without either its primary American justification or its primary intellectual tool. One destroys a particular lie. The other destroys the factory that manufactures lies. Environment Layer. The Contagion of Cruelty and the Power of Character, quotes 2-3. Jacobs. Name the social mechanism. Cruelty is contagious in uncivilized communities. That explains how oppression spreads and normalizes itself across entire populations. Washington. Assert the individual's power to transcend uncivilized circumstances through the development of character that circumstances cannot ultimately define or permanently contain. Together, provide the complete diagnosis and the personal antidote. Jacobs explains why oppressive environments are so destructive. They spread their cruelty like infection, degrading everyone exposed. Washington answers what the individual can do inside that environment. Build a character so strong that the contagion cannot fully take hold. Social diagnosis and personal response in a single layered insight. Power layer. Internal resources and the necessity of struggle. Quotes 4-5. Tubman. Declare the existence and the sufficiency of the inner resources, strength, patience, passion, already present in every person and available for the work of changing the world. Douglas. Name the price of progress honestly. There is no progress without struggle, so that the struggle encountered in the work is recognized as necessary mechanism rather than evidence of failure. Together, arm the person doing the work of transcendence with both the resource inventory and the realistic expectations they need. Tubman says you have everything required. Douglas says using it will involve struggle. Together they eliminate both the excuse of insufficient capacity and the discouragement of unexpected difficulty. You have what you need, and the difficulty you meet is proof you are making progress. Action layer. Making opportunities and humanity as the standard. Quotes 6-8. Breedlove. Translate all of the above into movement. Get up, make opportunities, refuse the passive waiting that systems of oppression depend on for their perpetuation. Sojourner Truth. Anchor the entire enterprise in the standard that measures all action. Does it serve humanity? Religion, ideology, effort, and achievement are only as valuable as their humanity, and humanity is always the final test. Together, complete the framework with its most practical instruction and its deepest moral anchor. Breedlove provides the activation energy. Get up and make, while Sojourner Truth provides the evaluative standard that ensures all that making serves what matters. Action without humanity produces energy without direction. Humanity without action produces principle without power. Together they are the hands and the heart of the entire transcending oppression framework.
Free Easy Extra Advantage Math, Spelling and Reading Workbooks you can download for free at stop2think.com or buy at educationstopshate.com. Free Easy Math Wisdom Workbooks with octo repetition to grow math self-confidence. You'll get plenty of repetitive practice of age ranges and averages of our 52 teams of 8 quote authors. Free Easy Alpha Cipher-coded puzzles teach letters, numbers, and phrases using antique wisdoms that encourage and educate. Can you decode this cipher quote of encouragement using either our learning to spell or just for fun instructions? And since time is money, practice reading faster with 52 teams of antique rival wisdoms that have passed the test of time to encourage, educate, and entertain generations for centuries. We offer printed versions and timed videos with background music. Sign up for free weekly emails of 52 teams of antique rival wisdom workbooks with easy math, spelling, and reading practice. And, if you'd like to get paid for sharing our wearable wisdoms, keep this in mind. Everyone I know wears a shirt, and most of us change them daily, so change your shirt and change the world. Social equalities are blatantly subliminal antique positive wisdoms repetitively shared without saying a word. This applies to all our wearable shareable wisdoms. Like pretty witty baby onesies and baby tees that you and others will see and read multiple times a day. The same is true with pretty witty kids, but they'll also share these wisdoms with anyone that can read at daycare or school. Youthful truths let your kids gain confidence sharing antique wisdoms with their friends. Imagine them sharing words of wisdom with classmates and teachers. I think, therefore I think tees I wear is a super easy way to share words of wisdom that have passed the test of time. Our social equalities help make us all wiser and kinder with blatantly subliminal messages promoting a more fair and equal opportunity society for all. And don't forget our giftwisdoms.com for birthdays and holidays that makes it easy to share the wisdom with clothing, coffee mugs, and magnets. So do the future a favor by encouraging, educating, and entertaining with words of wisdom that have passed the test of time to make us all wiser and kinder. With wearable wisdoms to fit babies, kids, and adults. You can clothe a whole family, city, or state. Join the 52 of 8 today.